How else are evils evidence for imperfections? I claimed at the start I'd be defending naturalism, but so far that hypothesis has been relegated to the sidelines. It's time to bring that hypothesis into the game to see what it has to say about observed evils. Recall naturalism entails the universe is indifferent to the nature and conditions of sentient life. Using likelihood comparisons, I argue there are at least 3 evolutionary observations about evil that are more likely given naturalism than theism. First, according to what I'll call the evolutionary languishing of sentient beings, for hundreds of millions of years, biological organisms have experienced mostly profound languishing, predation, starvation, and disease. Secondly, 99% of all species that have ever lived are now extinct, and the state of nature is locked in a savage struggle for survival over limited resources. Finally, according to personal tragedy, some lose themselves entirely by coming to believe their lives are, on the whole, no longer worth living. Another interesting point about all these observations is that they are straightforward physical implications of the second law of thermodynamics. According to this law of nature, entropy, or the measure of disorder in the universe, is always increasing because there are more ways for things to be disordered than to be ordered. There are many more ways for animals to suffer than for them to experience pleasure, many ways for life to languish than to flourish, and many more ways for us to experience tragedy than triumph. Naturalism predicts this kind of thermodynamic indifference towards sentient life. However, given Trent's classical theism, these are neither accidental nor unfortunate byproducts of an intentionally designed
Okay, can I
process,
stop?
but rather the very clockwork of the process.
Just very briefly. So he mentioned very briefly that, oh, naturalism entails that you're going to have this suffering going on. I don't know how he got that conclusion. That's another, I didn't mention this earlier, but I just want to mention there that it's not at all clear to me that naturalism actually predicts that there's going to be a high intensity of suffering, right?
That's the lack of clarity there when it comes to this, because indifference, naturalism implying indifference, doesn't predict substantially that there will be a lot of suffering, that there will be a profusion of suffering, right? It makes no substantial prediction on that. Rather, it's just epistemically more natural or friendly towards naturalism that there would be such states of affairs. You don't even get near entailments or any entailments unless you add more theoretical content into the theory that somehow will allow you to make an entailment or a near entailment based on that. So yeah, it's not at all clear that naturalism makes any substantial prediction that there will be a profusion of suffering.
Process itself. This is the divine means by which God intentionally chose to bring about the goal of finite creatures through his creative act. So God actively employed gratuitous pain, languishing, and tragedy in his providential production of humanity for hundreds of millions of years. This is really surprising.
I'm not sure what he means.
Tim, on this is like his bit on evil. So I'd turn to you on what you want to say.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm not in any disagreement on the data. That for a multi-billion year process, there have been intense, or there's been a profusion of animal suffering, but I don't really understand what he means when he says that God actively employed. To me, that if he means that like actively, like directly, God directly employed predation to be integral to the evolutionary process, well, I don't think that at all. I don't think that you can really make that conclusion. He's attacking Trent's view, right? But I don't think even really Trent's saying that. Rather, is he saying that God upheld the process? God authorized the process? Well, yes, God obviously upheld and authorized the process, but that's not directly that God is directly involved in gratuitous suffering, but rather God directly upholds such a system that largely plays out on its own and indirectly gives forth to these bad states of affairs, right? God isn't going to directly cause any of these things or anything, things of that sort, right? It's kind of this idea that that theism would predict that that any of these evolutionary bad states of affairs that would occur, they would occur at the cost of goods to be had, right? So this is what theism, this is fundamental to understanding how theism makes predictions, right? That God pursues goods, but he also pursues goods at the cost or the risk of certain bads, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing here, that God pursues the existence of the goods of creatures and things of that sort, and the variety and diversity of creatures, right? But he does so at the cost of certain suffering, right? So John Schneider kind of gives this idea of that God wants to pursue moral, ethic, and aesthetic goods that can more or less can really only be had at the cost of certain kind of evolutionary kind of suffering scenario that's been laid out here and stuff. But I think my main point of contention there is going to be with this idea that God actively employs these processes rather than God authorizes these processes.
Yeah, that's super great, Tim. And I would encourage people, if they want to get more into this, to check out Tim and I's, or mostly Tim just talking, kind of like this video, which is just Tim and Kyle mostly talking. The response we did to Joe Schmid on the problem of evils. So we spent like a good hour 15.